Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Annie and this is my creative detour. Today I'm super excited because I'm actually going to be doing my first collage in my new art journal for the Catalysts and Curiosities series that Meg from Megjournals is running. Today's prompt is about connection. I made a new journal. So this was the journal that I made and I posted a video on that. So I will put the link to that below on how I made it. But I've made this especially for the series, the Catalysts and Curiosities. And I'm going to open it up and undo it and take the pages out that I want to work on. So it just opens up and you can work on it laying it flat, or you can take the pages out. So I'm going to do that today. I've chosen my pages. I think I'd like to work on these two. So I'm just going to take those out. I'll threadle them back in later. Pop the journal to the side and I'm going to work on these. Now the prompt being connection is really strong for me because in these two compositions, I'm doing two different ones. I'm going to be talking about the women in my life and my upbringing, of how they used their hands and they created a lot of things with their hands. And the first composition is going to be touching on different types of hand sewing that these women have done and that I remember even growing up as a little girl. And they taught me how to do certain things. So that's what this one's about. And then on my second page, I'm going to be doing a collage on my great auntie Laura. She's no longer with us. She was born in 1916. And I'm pretty sure she lived until she was either 97 or 98, something like that. But I have a lot of my Auntie Laura's collections of things. Now, she was a great collector of things that were memorable. I'm not a hoarder, but I hold on to things that have sentimental value. So, for example, her 1970s or 60s, 70s style sewing machine, I use it as my bedside table and I use it every day. And she collected a lot of things. My Auntie Laura was a seamstress and she was an excellent seamstress and she worked doing that up until into her 70s, and she could make anything. But anyway, I'll talk about Auntie Laura when we get to here. But for these ones, I have other women in my life that have all done quite a lot of handicrafts and have passed on those skills to me. And so I have a very strong connection to these people, especially now that I'm doing a lot of craft myself. And I have a lot of resources from my aunt. You know, I have a container full of old postcards dating all the way back to the early 1900s. Some of them are 1912, 1917, and through till, the 70s. And I have stamp albums and I have a huge big wad of papers, newspapers, and editorials and magazines from her that my mother has kept so well, and now she passed them on to me quite a few years ago, and now I have the pleasure of using them. So let's get started, and I'll talk about the first page that I'm going to do, and then we'll get that one on the go. Okay, so with this first page, you can see that it is a cross stitch pattern. And I pulled this out of an old cross stitch book that I had. Now I started doing cross stitch probably about 30 years ago, and I was inspired actually by my paternal grandmother, and she used to make doilies, and she would crochet with very fine thread doilies and make them all, completely from thread, or sometimes she would do crocheting, very fine crocheting around the edge of fabric and then do cross stitch onto the fabric. And I was also inspired by one of my mother's friends. Her name was Myrtle, and she used to do quite a lot of embroidery and sewing. So like I said, different people inspired me in different ways. So This actually came out of a book that has a lot of cross-stitch patterns on it, and I purposely put it in here for this exact prompt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay some tissue paper over this and just pull it back, the background back a little bit. And I've torn out some just good quality drawing paper, and I've cut out from different places different squares. One of the elements that Meg has given us is patchwork. So what I've decided to do is to lay down some of these images that I've cut out of the magazines for different things. Now, I'll talk about the different people that they represent. So once again, we've talked about my paternal grandmother. Her name was Little Nana. This one here is representing her doing making doilies, to go on your dressing table, and so it's got some cross stitch on it. This one here is to represent my mother. Now, my mother has tried her hand at lots of different arts and crafts over the years. She has done leatherwork, and she's done ceramics, and she now does craft with me. Every Thursday we do a video call because we live in different states in Australia, and we do craft together. Last week we had a watercolour session together. But she, probably about 20 years ago, decided she wanted to do a patchwork quilt. She made the most beautiful patchwork quilt that she gets out every winter and uses on her bed. And she made all of it by hand. Some people do patchwork quilts and they do some of the sewing on a sewing machine, but she did every single portion of hers by hand. So this one here is just an image out of a magazine. It's not the one she made, but it represents my mother. This one here represents my Auntie Laura because it has lots of different fabric and different types of sewing in it. So it has a quilt down the bottom and it has some cushions in it. Now, she used to make cushions out of all of her scraps. She would make cushions. Then there's also some crocheted rugs. And then at the top, there's some more quilted fabric. So it's a bit of a collection of things. So this one here, because she was a seamstress, she could do lots of different things. Now this one here is going to represent my maternal grandmother. Now my maternal grandmother lived with us from when I was a small child, from when I was around about 5 or 6, something like that. I have memories of her when I was growing up, of going home from school, and she would have us afternoon tea, and then we would sit and chat, and we would do schoolwork at the table while she was cooking dinner. And she would crochet, and I actually have one of her crocheted rugs in my bedroom at the moment. And she would crochet all these different throws and blankets. And I learnt to crochet from my grandmother who lived with us. And my brother did too. She taught both of us how to do it. And I still know how to crochet now. I would be a bit rusty, but I think it's a little bit like riding a bike. I think it wouldn't take long for me to, get back on the wagon if I picked it up. So that one represents my grandmother. And this one here is a tapestry. Now it's a very modern tapestry. The tapestry that we have, that we got given for our wedding, quite a long time ago. It is more of a traditional tapestry of a traditional scene, but nevertheless, this one represents my husband's grandmother, and her name was Granny. Granny gave us the most beautiful tapestry, and Granny was a knitter. She actually would knit socks, woolen socks, and jumpers, and then anything that got holes in, she would darn them and they'd almost be invisible. But she also did tapestries, and she had, she would do big tapestries actually. So this represents her. And then the last image is just an indication that there are all these women in my life that have inspired me and have equipped me creatively for where I'm at now. And, like we're talking, when I learned to crochet, I was probably about 7. So that's 50 years ago. So that's where I'm heading with this. I'm going to glue this down. I'm going to just draw on some stitching around it so that it looks like a quilt. And then I'm actually going to hand sew on, embroider on some, and cross stitch onto these some details. So let's get started and put down some tissue onto this and get it prepped, and then we'll go on to gluing this down and getting it, and then I'll start doing some slow stitching. Okay, so I'm just going to glue this down with some Mod Podge actually. I want it to cover the whole page and to stick fairly well. And I want it to be a little bit transparent. So transparency is one of the elements. So I'm going to just put this down and hope for the best. Okay, we didn't do too badly with that. I'll just give that a coat over the top. So I was really excited to hear about this new series that Meg was running, because I love the idea of doing slow journaling, of having time to think about things and to ponder and let things percolate. And that's what I've done with this one actually. You know, I've thought about it pretty much for the whole 2 weeks before I've started to actually do anything with it. I love letting the idea of your creative thoughts just percolate. It's very enjoyable for me to let that happen. I used to do that with my work. Being a designer, you obviously, when you're coming up with a concept, you let things like, percolate. Now, this is actually, I said that this was tissue, but it's not actually. It's part of a serviette. When you separate a serviette, it's the portion that has come off of that. Okay, I'm just going to let that sit and dry, and we'll move on to doing the next thing. Now I'm going to glue this on. I'm just going to use some glue stick and glue it down, because it'll give me a little bit of time to move it around. But I'm hoping that I've measured everything fairly well. I'll do the cross stitch one. I haven't actually done cross stitch, maybe in about, it'd have to be 20 years since I've done cross stitch. So I pulled out of my cross stitch supplies some threads, and I pulled out the ones that Meg had for her colour scheme that she posted on the email. I thought that I would use the colours that she suggested to do some slow stitching over the top of this. Now you can see that I've laid it out in a very strong grid pattern, and that's because I wanted to, really embrace that patchwork element. And what I'm going to do now is, I know that there's slow stitching involved, but I actually want to just do some hand-drawn markings on this, because I love doing markings on my work. So I'm going to do some markings with my architectural pen, and I've really got the fine one out. Okay, you can see that I've drawn some stitching onto there, and now I'm going to do a whole lot of slow stitching onto here, onto pulling out different elements on this with the colour palette that I have on the desk. So I will pop back after I've done that, because obviously that's going to take me hours and hours to do. So I will pop back and show you that. We'll then put this onto our page, because it will have dried as well. So I'll come back in quite a few hours and show you where I'm up to, or maybe even the next day. We'll see how we go. See you soon. Okay, I'm back, and to be honest, it's a few days later, but that's the beauty of this series, is that you can take your time to do things. Now the page is dry. I've coated that with a few layers of the serviette, the white bit of the serviette when you pull it apart. So I've used that, and it's got a coat of Mod Podge on it. I have finished my slow stitching, so I'll show you that. I've done some flowers at the top there, a sunburst, and some stitching here on the patchwork quilt. And on the crochet, I did a few different types of stitches, a fan stitch and a blanket stitch. And then down here, we've got a daisy and a sunburst and some French knots down here. And I've just put the sentiment on it, time to make new memories, because all of these represent different people in my life that have made things in the past. But the connection with that is that I'm now using a lot of their resources, doing different types of art with it or craft with it and different compositions. So I've just made a piece of tracing paper and just reinforced it for something to stick on. And I'm going to lay that over the top, and you can see that that gives a little bit of that transparency to it, but I've named the different people. So like I mentioned to you the other day, the cross stitch onto like doilies and that, and it reminds me of my little Nana. The patchwork is to represent my mum. This one here is to represent my great aunt, Auntie Laura, who I'll be doing the next page on. This crochet one down here with the crocheted blankets is to represent my Nana. And this one here is to represent my husband's grandmother, called Granny. So I've written those names on there, and I'm just going to stick that on the back, then make a pocket out of it. And I've also written on one of the postcards that came from my Auntie Laura. I'm not sure if I showed you the tin of postcards, but really old postcards. So I've got a box here of old postcards that my Auntie Laura, great Auntie Laura, had collected. And they're from all different eras. Some of them are written on and some of them aren't. So I've got those that I draw on now and then. So I've just put a piece of fabric on it, and this is actually of Hyde Park in Sydney. Now, unfortunately, the postcard is not dated, but on the back, I've just written that this is part of the Catalysts and Curiosities at Megjournals, and then I've written out the prompts and the snippet, the quote about the creativity is not the finding of things, but the making something out of it after it is found. And that's the one I'm using because I'm using a lot of items that my great aunt has found decades ago and has, collected them. And now that she's gone, I'm the lucky recipient of them all, and I'm now using them. So that's the quote I'm using. And I'm just going to pop that in. So let's glue those down. I'm going to put some double-sided tape on this first and a bit of glue. And after we do this page, we'll go on to the next page, which is a collage page. And you'll be able to see that I've actually glued something on the back of that because I want to turn it into a pocket. I didn't want anything to get caught on it. So let's glue that down now. And I'm just going to use art glitter glue for the pocket. I'm going to glue that onto this cross stitch background. Okay. So I won't put that in. We'll put that in later after it's dried. We'll just let that sit for a bit. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next. Okay, I have got a little bit of a head start on it. This is the next page, and you can see that I've prepped the background. Now, what I did was I actually laid down first onto my original page. I put down a paper pattern, a sewing pattern. You can see the lines here of that. But my auntie, who's here, my great aunt, Auntie Laura, isn't she lovely? She didn't use paper patterns. She would design her own clothes and for her customers, and she would use newspapers, and she would collect lots of newspapers, hence the reason I've got some, I think, but she would use them as her paper pattern. So she would cut them out and then pin them to you and use the paper patterns. So I've got the pattern in the background to show that it's about sewing, but link it more to her, I've put a pull out, like a torn out page of an old newspaper. It was actually printed in April the 2nd, 1968, and it was all about fashion. So I've cut out the word fashion. The heading of it, here it is: Fashion is a fickle mistress. So it was an article in the newspaper about fashion. So I'm just going to glue this on here. I'm just going to run that along there. And I also have, you can see, oh, actually, I've got some sheer fabric for transparency that I'm going to put onto here. I also have a glassine bag, and I've put some of the threads in it from when I was doing the slow stitching, and a couple of buttons. And that's because I remember when I was little, when we'd go and visit my great auntie Laura, that she would have threads all over her carpet from sewing. And I would sometimes sit underneath the table and brush all the threads together. And she had bottles and bottles of buttons in the sideboard and different locations, and I would be allowed to play with some of the buttons. So I have a fond memory of that. So I've put a couple of buttons in there that work with the colour scheme and some thread that I'm going to put on here. I also have some lace. I have a bust, but this doesn't look anything like what she would use, but it symbolises somebody being a seamstress. I also have the post office in Sydney, the general post office, because my auntie Laura would go to Sydney quite often on the train and pick up supplies, like go to different, haberdashery stores or suppliers in Sydney, because they lived outside of Sydney, and would pick up things and would sometimes have things sent to her. So I just put the post office in to symbolise her going to Sydney all the time. I have a pair of scissors, obviously, and I have this lovely lady, but I'll get to her in a moment. I also have cut out of one of the books in my stash that I got recently, a African violet. And when we'd go and visit her, she would have African violets, and if a leaf broke off, she would stick the leaf into some soil and it would turn into a new plant. And I actually spoke to my mum this week and said, I've got a memory of African violets at Auntie Laura's house. Is that right? And she said, yes, that is correct. So it's funny, like when you're doing these sorts of projects, that memories come back, which is beautiful, really. And then I just have a stamp, because she obviously lived in a different era to us, where there was no internet and there was no emails, and correspondence was slow, getting supplies was slow. So she would be constantly posting things and also catching trains. So I've got a stamp here of the railway centenary in 1854 to 1954. So I've just got a stamp. So that's all going to go on here. So let's put this together. Now, our lovely lady here is to symbolise some of my great Auntie Laura's customers. I have done some slow stitching on her. I'm not sure whether the camera's picking it up, but I've done some stitching on her hat and her gloves. I've put some French knots on her buckle of her belt and on her collar and her brooch, and then I've done some blanket stitch along her pockets, and then just a little bit of embroidery on the dress. So we're going to put her here, but let's stick down our piece of fabric first. And I'm going to put this down with double-sided tape, I think. So I have thoroughly enjoyed doing this and going through all of the lovely resources, flicking through the newspapers and going through the stamp albums and the postcards, and even through my sewing box that has a lot of her threads in. So that's been lovely, actually. I'm just going to lay that on there, and it will get glued down through some of the fibres with the other things. All right, I think, well, don't these ladies look lovely with their fashion? All right, we'll glue this one down first, I think. Now, if there's a little bit of background noise, I'm really sorry about that. There's a house about 2 or 3 doors down that is getting demolished. It's a reasonably old house. It's probably 60 years old, but they're knocking it down and they're going to be building 2 new houses in its place because, like lots of places in the world, land now is at a premium. So, all right, I think we want to put her on next, or maybe the lace. Let's put the lace on. Now, I should probably be putting this on with something other than art glitter glue, but I don't really have. I need to probably get some fabric glue. We'll see how this goes, and if worse come to worse, I will stitch it on with a bit of hand stitching. I do have a sewing machine, but it's not working at the moment, and I either need to get it serviced or I need to get a new one. I'm liking that. And let's put her down. We need to name her. I'm not sure what her, oh, look at the back of all the stitching. We need to think of a name for this lovely lady. I think we will call her Florence. I think we'll name her Florence. Dry a bit. I'm going to put some scissors down here and tuck them under her dress. These scissors are from some Tim Holtz ephemera, and so is the mannequin bust, whatever. I actually don't know what they're called, those sewing mannequins. If you know, put a little comment below of what it's called. Now we're going to put the African violet on because it's really a symbol of how when you're doing something like this, that memories come flooding back of just little obscure things that not necessarily important, but it's incredible the things that you remember. Like, I was playing with the thread, and then that made me think about picking up the threads off the floor. She sometimes would say, "Oh, pick up some of those threads for me," playing with the buttons. And not only was a amazing seamstress, but she could cook. When we'd go to visit, she'd make amazing scones and have homemade jam with it. Sorry, get back to the story. She would make the most amazing scones, fresh scones that morning. And when it was strawberry season, because my auntie had a strawberry farm, and my auntie would give my great aunt a lot of strawberries. And so when she got a whole stack of strawberries, she would make homemade strawberry jam. And we still comment to this day on her strawberry jam being the best strawberry jam ever, with big lumps, plump bits of strawberry in. She was an amazing cook. I'm liking that. And I'm going to put this glassine bag with a bit of double-sided tape on it and just a tiny bit of glue to help it on its way. I'm going to put this here and fold this bag over. There we go. Okay, there's our 2 pages for our first prompt for connection for the Catalysts and Curiosities. So I'll just run through it. We have a patchwork themed collection of images that I've done some slow stitching on, connecting with the memories of different people in my upbringing who I have a strong connection with to this day. And I've got a postcard to slide into that pocket. And then I have my great auntie Laura here, being a seamstress, and my memories of her and all of the things that she collected, that even though that she's no longer with us, I'm getting the pleasure of using a lot of these things now. So I have a strong connection to her on a daily basis. Whenever I'm crafting and doing collage art or anything, I'm using a lot of the resources that she has saved over the years. So this is a little bit of a memory page of my great auntie Laura. So let's put that in my new art journal that I made. And like I said, I will put the link below to this art journal. And I've made it so that I can purposely do what I've done on this project. I can take pages out and work on them and then put it back together. And it also means that it can grow and get fatter and fatter depending on how much I stuff in it. I probably will put quite a bit in it. So there we go. I've put it back into the art journal and I've popped the postcard into the pocket with the information on it. So there we go. There's my first spread for the Catalysts and Curiosities series by Meg at Megjournals. And the prompt was connection. And I have absolutely loved reconnecting with my auntie and other members of my family that have been very creative over the years, but particularly my auntie, because I'm using all of her resources now and enjoying making them. Thank you for watching the video today. I really appreciate it, and hopefully you've enjoyed watching me go down memory lane. I will be doing the next prompt in my journal again, and I will see you all very soon. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up and think about subscribing to the channel. Thanks again, and bye for now.